Okay, good afternoon and welcome to Poison Pen Bookshop, and thank you for coming. Hope you're going to enjoy this afternoon. Tonight we have Tim Garvin, who's written a book, Dredging in Swann, and we're going to be discussing that. So, hello Tim. I know a lot of you know who he is. And so we're going to talk about his book, but before we get into the book, we want to talk a little bit about how you became a writer.
Yeah.
What was it that said, hey, I can do this, I'm a writer?
I seem to have a facility with the English language from early days, so that would seem natural for me to be a writer. I wasn't very good at it, and I tried here and there, and as I often say, when let's say you go to a restaurant and you taste some really good food, and you go home and you try to cook it, it's not quite as good. And you go the same way when you read really good fiction. And I was an avid reader of fiction. My mother, of course, read us a lot of fiction when we were kids, and my father as well. And then I tried to write fiction, and it just didn't taste as good. So I picked up the pen many times through the years, and till I got as old as I am now. Almost about 5 years ago, I began to think. Actually, sentences began going off in my head as I woke up, and I said, "Yeah, I should probably write those down. Those are pretty good." And so I had a book that I had been wanting to write for 35 years, and I hadn't quite plotted it out. And so I built a cabin by the creek. We live on a creek in North Carolina, and kind of in the country. And so I said, "Oh, I'll build this cabin, and that'll give me some incentive to go down there and write." It was my writing cabin, and it's on my website, by the way. You can see it. And so I did, and I began to write, and sure enough, writing how it happens internally, psychically, is mysterious as anything in the mind. I mean, I always think of sentence making. I'm making a sentence right now, and somehow it's going to end with some form of grammatical correctness, I hope. And yet I have no idea how I even got into this sentence and how I'm going to get out of it. I don't know. In the same way, I don't know when I'm writing what I'm going to say. I kind of know the direction I'm going. Writers often talk about there are two kinds of writers: the plotters and the pantsers. Those who plot carefully and outline, and those who kind of go by the seat of their pants. Lee Child's famous for not knowing after the first sentence he writes what the next sentence will be or what's going to happen. And he often advocates doing that. And there are some writers who much prefer to create an outline of some kind. And I'm kind of in the middle, and I guess most writers are probably in the middle. I mean, I kind of knew what I was going to do, but that first book I wrote is called Bajan. I self-published that book, and it'll be out again in days to come, I think, maybe with a publisher. But I didn't. I got partway into that book and realized it was a traveling zoo, and all these people had to take showers. And how I got to engineer that. That was a big problem. I got a big old piece of butcher paper, and I divided up the 5 days of the book, and shower here, shower here. I had to just work it all out, which is sort of the, I guess it's the puzzle making part of writing. You do have to do that. It's not the inspirational part. That part is even more mysterious, of course, the identification of character and this and that. And this, and I'm answering this question way too long. I have a feeling. Yeah. Anyway.
You don't want to hear play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could almost give a discourse on writing. It is fun for me to think about it, but you write from the heart. There's no doubt about it, and the mind is there. And I guess I better go on to the next question, or I'll get lost in this discourse.
That's fine. So you're not an overnight success. After 35 years, you're...
Well, yeah, I'm not even a success yet. Don't tell me. But yeah, no, I'm not an overnight success. But I'm looking forward to a career in writing now, and I'm getting on in years, and How long I'll have mental brightness, God knows. I just hope that I have another 10, 15 years, and I intend to. But I do like to write, and I like to plan books and make them come out. And when, somebody once said, well, I have an MFA in writing, which I got 30 years ago, and one of my professors said, writers hate to write, but love having written, and that's kind of the truth of it.
Yeah.
You go down there and there's nothing more intimidating, formidable than the blank page, because it challenges you. You got to fill that up with something, and it is a difficult thing sometimes. But when it begins to flow, then you're kind of surprised, honestly, as much as I'm surprised about anything in the mind. It is surprising.
So when you first originated the concept for this particular story, how long did it take you to?
Well, I wrote Bhajan and self-published it, and I sold 100 copies. It wasn't going to go anywhere, and I realized, I got to write in the confines of a genre that people do buy and do read, and that's the way I can get an agent and a publisher. There's 4 hoops every writer has to jump through. The first is to write a book, and the second is get an agent, and the third is get a publisher, and this is the 4th hoop right here, try to get read. So when I finished Bhajan, I said, well, best thing for me to do is to write another book that I think I can sell, get an agent and sell. And so I began to think of what would that book be like, and what genre would it be. Well, there's not that many genres, and I don't write romance. And so I thought, well, the next genre is crime mystery, and that's what this is. I am a writer that is, I don't write, action mysteries. I write character mysteries, you may say. There's a category called literary mystery, and I suppose if I was going to be in a genre, that'd be my genre. But as I began to plan the book, I lived in North Carolina, and I thought, well, I better set it in North Carolina because I can go there, and I can talk to people who are around here and get some information. And there were sheriffs that were willing to talk to me, and cops, and I didn't know. I mean, if you can write a crime novel, you got to involve the police, and I didn't know anything about the police, except I didn't want them to get me. So, so I had to go and make friends with the sheriffs, and I did, and lieutenants and majors and sergeants and all that, and went for ride-alongs, and then drove, and then I went and I said, well, where's the best place in North Carolina to make a book? And I thought, Onslow County. It's really the prototype for Swann County, which is this county. It's a fictional county in this book, but Onslow County has an ocean and a marine base, and a lot of problems with that. Of course, PTSD being the foremost, and of course bars, and it's got hog farms, and you could use it all. So I did. And next book, actually the book I just finished and handed in is set in a different county, because Seb Creek, the detective, has become a little bit famous because he solved a complicated murder that made national news, and a book was written about him. So he's lent to another county, which is an even more desperate county, and he goes there and solves another series of crimes, and I guess he's going to get even more famous. We'll find out if I want to pursue that. But in any case, that's the reason why I chose Onslow County and created a fictional Swann County. I thought it would be, I could get there in my car and drive. I had a RV. I could go over there and stay for a few days, which I did several times, and meet the sheriff. And the sheriff, I could always call the guy and say, listen, if this happens, for instance, in this book, without giving anything away, 2 helicopters collide. It's early in the book, and some Stinger missiles are stolen from the wreckage. Actually, not from the wreckage, but they were dropped from the cargo net before the wreck, which is what caused the wreck. And I kind of wanted to know. He was the provost marshal of Camp Lejeune at one time, and which is the chief law enforcement officer. So I wanted to know how would that be handled, what would happen, and so having good references, good sources is so valuable. And I have several in the FBI now as well. You could call them up. They've got a whole department that they deal with the writers and screenwriters, and you could call them up and ask them questions, and they'll tell you everything except the electronics. They won't tell you their electronic sophistication because they don't want that to be known. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've answered that.
So all of the threads of this book were all research.
Yes. Yes.
PTSD.
Yes. PTSD.
Venus flytrap.
Venus flytraps. See, thank you. My wife is always telling me to remember to mention Venus flytraps, which is, of course, that's a Venus flytrap, as you may know. It's a carnivorous plant. And in a 100-mile radius around Wilmington, North Carolina, is the only place where Venus flytraps indigenously grow. They're grown all over the world now. They're used in a cancer cure and various other applications. But and of course, they're a lovely decorative plant. But they're carnivorous plant. They get flies. And the soil is poor there, so that's why they needed carnivorous insects in order to survive. But they're also poached, and one of my characters is a poacher of Venus flytraps. He's a nice guy, don't worry, but he is a poacher. And anyway, and he's the guy that well, I won't go any further than that because I'll leave these surprises to you. But yeah. Go ahead.
Well, before you get into the book, I just want to ask you, how did you find a publisher or agent first, then a publisher, or a publisher first, then an agent?
Well, the circuitous route that I applied to get an agent was this. There was a friend of mine named Fred Chappell, who was the poet laureate of North Carolina and a good writer, written a lot of good books. He came to the University of Arkansas when I was there, back in the early 70s sometime. And we hit it off, and in fact, I almost transferred over to Greensboro to finish the MFA over there, but I didn't. But I knew him, and I hadn't seen him in 30 years. But he wrote a book and came to the bookstore near us and gave a reading. And Cynthia and I went, and I went up to him after I said, "Fred, do you remember me?" He didn't, but he had read one of my stories, and he knew, he kind of knew who I was. And he remembered going to the University of Arkansas. And so I asked him if would he send the book to his agent, and he sent the first chapter, and then she called me, and I went from there. Then I didn't end up with her. That's another circuitous thing, and the world of agents is a thorny path. Let me just say, but I won't bother you with all of that, but it is to get a book read by an agent, they may get 10 to 20 queries, as they call them, a day, and they sometimes have their assistant go through them and reject them as quickly as can, and it's just hard to get read. And right now there's 45 million books published, in print, so it's hard to find a place. It's hard to find an agent. It's hard for an agent to recognize quality even through a query letter. That's why recommendations from writers are valuable. Anyway, I was fortunate to have Fred in my camp, and he's been a good friend since. And in fact, he blurbed my book. He was kind enough to do that, and gave me a nice blurb. He's a nice guy. I love him dearly, and that's how I got started in the world of agents. And then, of course, after you get an agent, I'm just anticipating his next question would be, how'd you get a publisher? Well, the agent just sends your book out in manuscript form to a bunch of people. And first he sends a letter, says, I've got this book, you're going to love it, and do you want to read it? And maybe it gets read, maybe it doesn't. And I got rejected 10 times, and the 11th was an acceptance, that's the average. Actually, 12 is the average in the world of fiction. Harry Potter, as we all know, was rejected many times, and finally some little tiny publisher published this $1 billion book, and that publisher, by the way, is flourishing now, as you can imagine. But yeah, so yeah, it's the advice given about writing is persistence, and applying the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. You have to make the product, you have to do it. But then you just know you've got dice in your hands as you try to ply your way in this difficult field.
Yeah, writing a book sometimes is easier.
Yeah. As he says, writing sometimes is easier than than the rest of it. But here I am with this lovely crowd, for which I'm very grateful. And anyway, yeah.
Well, in the process of writing, what is typical your schedule?
Well, my schedule is I try to get a book done in 6 months. This first book, Dredging in Swann, was done probably in 11 months because I had to kind of learn how to do a mystery, and I had to solve a bunch of research problems. I had to figure out what was a Venus flytrap and what was a hog farm. I had to call a bunch of hog farmers, and ask them, and take pictures and yeah, it was quite a laborious researching issue there. But what was the question again? Sorry.
Your schedule.
Oh, my schedule. I knew there was something I was missing. Yeah. Well, I built that cabin in the woods, and so I wake up early, and I just would go down there before breakfast. Well, I don't eat breakfast anyway, but I would go down there at early, 6 o'clock or even earlier, and I would work until I had 500 words. That's my little paucity of words per day. Often I had more, but at least I had that many. And then if I had that many, I knew that I could write a 90,000 word book, which is what my books are, 90,000. They have to be anywhere from 80 to 90, and mine are a little bit on top of 90. And I knew in 6 months I would have a book done. And so, you kind of ox your way through. Really, it's sometimes, it's always formidable. There's never any time, I think, when I go down to that little cabin that I don't feel a little breathless fear, because there's a blank page down there. And Hemingway used to. He used to always stop mid-sentence, as he said, so that the engine of inspiration would already be ginned up a little bit. And Graham Greene used to write 300 words a day, and he would be in the mid-sentence, he'd count those words and he'd stop. And then you hear about writers, certain kinds of writers write, they say, and I think Tom Wolfe was one of them, 5,000 words a day, 10,000 some of them. And I don't know if those are all good words, but they do it. And of course, if they're writing science fiction, or something that they're not pinned or confined by anything in the natural world that they have to constantly get on the computer and say, now what the hell, what would, get some information, get some reference. They can just make it up, on the planet, zip wop, this happened, and you don't know anything about that. So, but no, it's I do take pride in sentence making, and I constantly, in the mornings I go back, and the first thing I do is to read my last day's effort, and I spend probably half an hour or more sometimes recasting that, sometimes adding to it or deleting part of it. And I do that, and then comes the blank page again, and hopefully that a lot of writers even will read poetry before they begin to write, just to get some flow going. There is something about that, some mystery about that. Life is mysterious enough, and that's profoundly mysterious to me. I do it, and I still don't know how it's done. It's so interesting that there are so many books written about how to write. It's so interesting to read those books. We could all read that, and we should all be able to write, but we can't. And I couldn't. I read them. Anyway, it's an interesting process.
Well, okay. In talking about the book, it is a crime mystery. There's a military, veterans, survival. There's PTSD involved in the book. There's even environmentally with the hog farms, and there is a little romance in there.
The romance is there. By the way, there is romance. I see I'm looking at a lot of ladies. Just so you know, there's some hugging and kissing in this book.
So, and you weave it all together. There's alternating chapters between the two real protagonists in the book, and Seb Creek, who is the good guy in the book.
Good guy.
this.
Don't be short and Cody.
No, no, I don't want to get too much into it.
Yeah.
But is any of that, any of that autobiographical in manner, as any of your experiences?
Well, he's asking, the book, just to clear something up, is written with 2 points of view. We call points of view, you're being confined to somebody's observational station and you're looking through the lens of their mind. And you probably all know what points of view are. But the omniscient point of view is when you can jump around. Editors deplore this, they call it head hopping, but you can still do it. And Tolstoy and Dostoevsky did plenty of head hopping. But now we like to stay with third person limited, as it's called. So you're looking from somebody's point of view. And if it's just one person, then that's extremely limited to one character, and you might as well write in first person because you're always in that same time frame. But if you are, what I've done is I wrote this book has 2 points of view, and I was used to that because Bajjan had 6 points of view, but it's Cody, and he's one of the culprits, one of the criminals, and he's as I was telling Larry, he's a nice guy. I like Cody, but he's asking, is there anything autobiographical about Seb Creek? And there is, in the sense that Seb Creek is a noble spirit. He is that, and he's not noir. There's a school of fiction that's called noir. In fact, I just wrote an essay for the Strand magazine called "The Light Inside Noir," in which I contended that despite the fact that we are fascinated by the darkness of noir, really what we're looking for is the light underneath that. We're looking for somehow to stir our psyches and find out what is refreshing and good about that experience. But what is autobiographical in Seb Creek is that I do hold there is some good thing in life that's worth pursuing, and it has maybe to do with divinity, maybe to do with however you want to characterize it. There's some, even if you're an atheist, there is something that we all think is good and worth doing, and Seb Creek does too. Seb Creek had a near-death experience. I have not, but I have studied them. It's another one of my many research projects. Near-death experiences, as you may know, has become much more prevalent now that cardiac resuscitation was possible in the 60s, and it entails all brain activity ceases, the heart stops, and the spirit, whatever that may be, is disassociated from the body. And you can look down, as these people report. Ibn Alexander wrote a book, something about heaven, I forget what it was called, a bestseller, in which he was dead for 7 minutes or 10 minutes. And many people, now there's been thousands of reports of these. In fact, the University of Virginia has 12 PhDs studying this phenomenon. It is ennobling because you've heard of, you go down a river of golden light or a tunnel, and you may see your dead relatives, and you can see them operating on you, and you know where they put your false teeth. And one guy knew he lost his false teeth, and he could tell. They put it in that drawer over there. Yeah. So Seb had that experience. He was in Iraq. He was a veteran from the Iraq War, and a victim of PTSD because he had to kill people. He did kill people, and then he came home and was distraught. The military, especially today with the internet so prevalent, there's just not any strangers anymore. Even if you're Mongolian, you can visit South Africa. Everybody knows everybody now, and it's harder now to kill people than it's ever been. And the military is desperate to find a way to bring soldiers back from war. They haven't found a way yet, but they're trying to. And Seb, his solution is to start. He's a singer, and he begins a singing group, singing only ballads full of feeling in which human emotion has been distilled through the centuries, or hymns, and it tends to slow the savage energy of combat. I read it in my research on PTSD. In fact, I've had PTSD, not from combat. I had 60-mile-an-hour head-on collision when I was young, and it was difficult for me to be in a car. In fact, I couldn't for some time. But Seb has had that, and his singing group tends to slow that savage energy. And the Mongol warriors, when they would come home from, and they had to do, as you may know, they would kill a whole city of people, all the men, women, and dogs, and then they had to go back to family life. Very difficult, even for Mongol soldiers, which were kind of inured to that kind of violence. So they would put them in a yurt, talk softly to them, and sponge them down until that panicked energy had subsided somewhat. So, my own PTSD experiences were not really what I was relying on, although I understood the phenomenon from my experience. But I did a lot of research about the military. You may have seen the movie The Hurt Locker, and also The American Sniper. Both of those were about PTSD and the effects on the psyche. Very difficult. Of course, rape victims also have PTSD. It's common now. Common to talk about it, still uncommon to find solutions for it. Yeah.
So in this book, we have Venus flytraps. Okay, so you mentioned it again.
Yes.
And yurts.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Venus flytraps, are, you don't get a lot of money for Venus flytraps, but North Carolina just made it a felony to poach Venus flytraps, because there used to be like 4.5 million of them. They kind of an estimated count. Now there's only 300,000, so they're trying to preserve them at all costs because they're a national or a state treasure, and they don't like them being poached. In fact, when I was doing the research, I noticed in the paper or on the internet somewhere that some couple of guys had been caught with backpacks full of Venus flytraps and were tracked down with dogs and arrested, and they gave them $1 million bond, which is unbelievable. So I called the judge that gave her that bond. I never got to speak to her, and she didn't call me back, but I spoke to her clerk, and she said, yeah, we gave her $1 million bond. They were making a point. Don't do this anymore. And so anyway. But when I was planning the book, it's something Larry is kind of alluding to. How do I plan this book? Well, I thought, well, I've got good hog farms, and I've got Venus flytraps, and I've got a military base, and I don't really remember, or even I don't know how the plot occurred to me, because plot, by the way, really critical in bookmaking. You can, as deep as you want to get into character, you have to know the story. In fact, P.G. Woodhouse, the author who you may know, and I love him, would say that he could do anything with the book once the plot was finished. Then he could write the book, once he understood the plot. And I had to do the same thing with this, although I confess, I was inexperienced enough as I was writing this book that I realized, damn, I got to drop another body in here somewhere. So I had to do that, and that's why the book took a little longer than 6 months. I had to do some rethinking, and I did.
The character said is the protagonist. Where do you come up with names? And we have somebody in this book named Rubella, which is Beatles.
Yeah.
How do you develop?
Yeah, I have another one named Semolina. Well, you have a little bit of liberty because it's a book from the South. And so somebody named Rubella may not be that uncommon. And it's probably very uncommon. I've never seen anybody named Rubella. But it's a lovely name. As I say in the book, it's a lovely name if you forget it's the measles. And Semolina, of course, is wheat, and that's another lovely name. Anyway, so you kind of expect Southern names to have a little flair and flavor to them. And when naming is fun. And in the second book I've written, by the way, I put a lot of John McVeigh's in the book, and
right.
Tom Rogers is in this one. My old friends, in fact, I populated it. I even have the pediatrician of my mother used to take us to when we were kids.
Oh,
He's in this book. Yeah, just using names, just for fun, mostly for the benefit of my brother and sister, who would be delighted when they came across those names, and they were. But
you don't kill them off, though.
No, these are ancillary characters, that are sort of off to the side, but not the main characters. But how you name a lot of writers will talk about there's something about and this has to do with the flavors of the unconscious, I know, and I'm not anywhere near explaining it, but there is a time when the name seems right, and you can, and this one was not this one, not this one, not this one, oh, that's the one, and that's how, and yeah, so that's how naming is done, and sometimes I'll even honestly get up on the internet and look at the list of boys' names, which of these would be good, you know, and so I go through those, or sometimes I'll open a book and just, yeah, anyway, there's a lot of ways to name, but they have to feel right, and that feeling is a mystery to me.
There's a couple of other items I want to talk about that you discuss in the book. The singing aspect of treating PTSD. Is that an acceptable method, or is something you created, or you'll actually use it? And then you talk about coming back from war and what turns it time to become indifference towards veterans, which I thought was really a very feeling moment when to read something like that in the book. Because most people wouldn't, you know, they say thank you for your service, but after a while it becomes indifference.
It's a boxing trick, yeah.
Yeah, what was the first part of that question?
The singing.
The singing.
As therapy.
Yeah. Singing, music therapy as PTSD therapy is being done, and we have a penchant in the medical field to give people pills. Of course, that only suppresses symptoms, and it's not helpful, but it's sometimes useful and needful, especially if somebody's suicidal or something. But singing therapy is a known, it does have a known therapeutic effect on PTSD. And my insight was that, you know, when you sing a song with your friends or by yourself, sometimes you come, as they say, verklempt, and you feel something surge in your heart, and maybe even tears come. I mean, there's some songs that, like Danny Boy for me is one, or Fur Elise is a lovely song. I love that so much, or The Rose, if somebody's really singing it beautifully, you can be filled with feeling, and I thought, well, that's got, before I even began to research music therapy and PTSD, before I tuned into that, I realized I decided Sam will have this singing group and that'll be useful. And then I was able to confirm that it was. But the insight, of course, is just that singing by itself, the combination of words and music, has some property, and again I'll use the word mysterious because I don't know how it happens, but we are sometimes filled with feeling. All of us feel that way, and our hearts lift, and we are moved, and that seems like a useful counter, and therapists say it is, to the frenetic energy and panicked energy and guilty energy and just of this, and savage energy of PTSD. It's just the opposite of that. It's just the opposite of that, where you think you're going to get killed and you better kill somebody, and or you should have killed somebody and you didn't, and so the other guy got killed. I mean, there's so many complications of PTSD. It's not a one-size-fits-all ailment. That's why it's so difficult to address, and no amount of drugs can do that. Although there are some breakthroughs here and there, some even with psychedelics that are useful for that, as well as for depression. Anyway, so what was the second part of that?
Indifference.
Yes. Well, he's mentioning there was a great deal of, we all of us, if you see a soldier, you often do tick off the box, thank you for your service. But of course, it's sort of the best we can do. And, you know, I mean, there's a veil over all of our hearts which yearn for, to break through the loneliness and to feel one with others. And we're not very good at it. We're all doing our best. And PTSD, you become very alone. It's hard to reach out of that. In the military, in order for you to pull the trigger and shoot somebody, they have to train numbness into you. You know, there's a true thing that in the Civil War, they'd find bodies with a rifle would have like 7 or 8 mini balls stuffed in the barrel. They would be loading their rifle in their panic and not shooting it, and that happens a lot. It's also, and the same thing happened in World War I. A lot of I think it was 30% of the soldiers fired their weapons in battle. I can't remember that. Don't quote me on that. It may be wrong, but it's difficult to do it, not just because it's killing people, but it's also extremely violent. Way different than hanging around the mall. And when you come home from that experience, whether you've been shooting people or being shot at or driving through bombs, just maybe you're in a military transport truck and you got to drive through bombs, and that's harrowing. You know, as Seb Creek notices a trash can fluttering in the breeze, and it alarms him because that's where they hide IEDs in Iraq, and trash cans a lot, trash bags. So you're alerted all the time, and there's no help for that, because it's just, yeah, I know that when I had that automobile accident, I couldn't control my desperate fear. When another car would approach me head on, I still drive on the right side of the road, way over there. Still do, after 50 years. But anyway, it gives myself reaction time, because I know it can happen. Anyway, the difficulty of that ailment in our lives today, and making war is a giant challenge for the military. They haven't solved it yet.
There are 2 expressions in the book. I think if it's local dialect or whatever, but you talked about use worked, someone's face worked. Worked.
Oh. Yeah?
W-O-R-K.
Yeah.
Worked, or emerged.
Oh.
And in describing, what actually does that mean?
Well, when someone, once, I just read, somebody noted to me that somebody's face was sheathed with emotion. And, you know, I think I have a tendency to say his face worked in some way, you know, grimaced. It's another way of saying grimaced, I think. And so what was the other one? Emerged. Oh, yeah, I said, yeah, that's true. In fact, I know that scene. The scene is when Charlene and Seb meet on the street, and Seb says he how sweet she was and how kind and thoughtful, and yet he had not emerged to her. And he's asking, where did that come from? Of course, and that does come from having been retreated into numbness through his PTSD, and to emerge from that sheath is what I was getting at. That she was all that he could have wanted had he been able to want her, and he wasn't. But don't worry, he does get involved with a nice lady.
Yeah, that's the other aspect of this. There is a pottery wheel involved in that.
There is, and one of my, in fact, is oddly enough, what was that movie with?
Ghost. The Ghost. Yeah, Ghost.
No, but there was a movie, Seb and Mia were the title characters of a recent, very popular movie. I can't remember what the name of it was. But anyway, when my wife and I saw that movie, we were delighted because I chose those 2 names for my characters. And I don't know exactly why, but they did work, and it obviously worked for the screenwriter of that other movie as well. But he does fall in love with Mia, and she's in the next book as well. She's a potter, and of course, my former career is in ceramics. I did that for 40 years and made a living at that. But so I know the potter's wheel and the potter's studio and all that goes into that, and that was easy for me to write. And of course, I was able to gin up a little plot as well, because Mia gets involved in the plot in an unexpected way, which I won't go into because spoiler. But, yeah.
Okay, well, you said 12 was the average rejections for writers, and you only had to go through 11.
Yeah.
So that makes you above average.
Yes. No, he said it, not me. But
Having read the book, you are above average. It's a wonderful book.
well, he testifies, and I'm pleased that he does. Yeah. Now I came here thinking I was going to read this book to you, but I'm not, because he said it would bore you. because he says reading books bores people. Well, yeah, I've heard that from other bookstores as well, and it may be true. It may be true. But in any case, you're in for a good read. I do say that, and because well, I mean, I love to make sentences. So the sentences, the pathway through the story is not unattractive. I hope that was my point.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to take some questions. If anyone has a question.
I have a question.
Sure.
So is Seb short for Sebastian?
It is.
And then who's going to play him in the TV Netflix series?
Well, this is from your mouth to God's ear, of course. But, you know, I've given that some dinner table thought, and I have no idea. I'll take anybody. You know? Yeah. And Seb is 33, I think, 34, mid-30s. Yeah. Yeah, he's just out of the war, and he and Mia are the hounds of time are snarling at their door because they're going to try to get together and have a child, and they have to think about it fairly quick. Yeah.
You know, that's one of the things about writing a series of books is to maintain the characters' age properly. We had C.J. Box the other day, and he, after 20 books, went and added up the years and realized his character's now 51. And he's got, you know, there's so many years he's going to be running around solving.
Michael Connelly too, and Harry Bosch.
Larry Bosch is 70.
They can do the same thing Sue Grafton did. She never let it get too old.
That's right. You
She
can.
said it always in the 80s.
Yeah, you can do
Yeah,
that.
just keep it
She
on.
never got too old.
Yeah, Seb, I've got plans for Seb. If I continue the series, which I will. Well, in the second book, you'll see there's something develops there that he's thinking about joining the State Bureau of Investigation or the FBI. They're both recruiting him, and but to do that, he'd have to leave Past the Salt Singers, which was his singing group, and so he's in a dilemma about that, and then he thinks his sheriff encourages him to just be patient. One day he'll be sheriff, and maybe he'll do that. We'll see. So anyway, that's maybe in the future.
So if you didn't get an agent through your friend, how did you get one?
Well, I did. I got an agent through my friend, and all a friend can do for you is give a little vouching, and that will give the agent a little more attention to that query letter in that first chapter that they receive. Now, it still has to be good. They have to like it, and I've had people ask me to send work that I didn't think was ready, which is very painful for me, to my agent. And you want to be as encouraging as you can. In fact, I'm starting a writing group back home, and I know there'll be people who want me to send, and which I want to do it. But at the same time, you don't want to waste your agent's time. And but no, there are people who get agents cold just by writing a good query letter and having maybe a little track record. In fact, I think Stephen King has a book about how to write, and in which he says, what you do is you publish a bunch of short stories and a couple articles, and then you can say you did that, and you write a good clear letter, and you send them a first chapter, and then basically, it's a matter of statistics as well. You send it to 40 agents, so 10 every week, and you just don't give up. And the first thing to do is write well. That's the first thing always, and that's sometimes very elusive because it's just hard to do. I mean, I don't know how, and besides, what do I know? If I don't like your work, it doesn't mean it's no good, So yeah.
You say write well, but there's so many bad writers I try, and I get. If you have to write well, how are they getting published?
Well, you have come to the right place, dear. No, there are writers that I have that same thing about. I wonder about that. I could tell you, which I can't tell you. I would love to tell you a story about the reader of my book, Bronson Pinchot. This book is available on audio as well, so here you can buy it. Bronson Pinchot is the what do you call it, audio talent, and he's an actor. You may know he's in Beverly Hills Cop, and a nice guy, and was in Perfect Strangers, which I didn't see as a sitcom in the 90s. He was Balky, some kind of European guy who didn't seem to get along with everybody. He was kind of odd guy. But anyway, he reads it, but he's written me he likes my work. He's written me a lot of funny emails about the work that he does and other people's work. There seems to be, I don't know, this guy would know more than me about how, why the forest of work that's out there. I'm a fond reader of the Russians, for God's sake, and there's only probably 10 mystery writers that I really know and read well, and John Sanford among them, Elmore Leonard, Ed McBain, which are the popular ones. We all know those probably. Yeah.
You've been discouraged from reading a chapter of your book.
Oh no.
But, however, you've written a wonderful poem, is my understanding, that your sister has regaled us with over the years. And I was hoping you might read it to the crowd. It's a wonderful poem.
Crafts, we're talking about
Oh my
crafts.
God. Well, look, listen, I'm going to decline that request, but with great reluctance, but I will read it to you later at some point. Yeah. That was a poem that I wrote when I was 18 years old on the back of a drive safety poster as I was watching concrete trucks get filled up, and I was supposed to go in there and see if the concrete mixture was okay, and I had no idea if it was okay. I said, yeah, okay. And so anyway, so I was able to write that poem. But yeah.
There, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So I know you talked about development of plot, development of character, and I came in a few minutes late. Did you talk about development of title?
Well, there's a little story behind that, so yeah, I'll talk about that. The story, the first title that I had for this book was Pass the Salt, and it's the acronym for PTS, for post-traumatic stress, and then they were going to call it Pass the Salt Dog. It Seb Creeks. They were going to call it Pass the Soul Dude. No, Pass the Soul Dude, and they decided to call it Pass the Salt Dog and drop the dog. But anyway, that was the title that I had, Pass the Salt. And the guy who was making the cover said, so what should we put on this cover? And I said, well, it's got the guy gets hung, you put a hung body, and it's got some Stinger missiles in it. That's about as much information as I could give him. And so he said he couldn't put this hanged person because he said bookstores don't care for that. A hanged man on the cover of your book is not advertising. So they put some Stinger missiles and it was Pass the Salt, and it wasn't a good cover, and my agent was alarmed at it and called him and rejected it after it had been, which was sort of a hardship on the publisher. So then they decided, well, they want to change the title anyway, because they were worried a little bit that Pass the Salt might sound like a cookbook.
Yeah.
But I said, well, put a gun on there, it's not going to look like a cookbook. but they said, okay, we'll change the title anyway. So I sent them 7 titles that I made up, and they chose Dredging in Swann, which is the one I liked anyway. So
you get input, but
I did get input.
You don't always get the final.
I did get input, but frankly, I only got input because I sort of raised my hand. They said, we want to change the title. And I said, well, damn, I better write some titles, because I don't want to just call it something, So I did write some titles,
And the word dredging brings up my question real quick, and that does make a suggestion. What is being dredged? Don't give anything away, but just a minute of there's an old murder and stuff.
Yeah.
Can
She's
you say a
asking
little
what
bit
was
about and economic racism?
Yeah,
Too, because
she's
that's a big
asking
thing.
about the title, the word dredging in the title, and there is something dredged up that is in evidence, but mostly it's the dredging of the past, because the precipitating incident, besides the crash of the helicopters, is a man that has been in prison for 48 years for a murder he never did admit that he did, and he was never released because of that, was finally granted through executive clemency of release. But before that, he inherited, and this is not giving anything away because it's in the first page of the book, he inherited a fortune from a reclusive old lady and also an estate on the Sable River. Very wealthy woman, and gave him all her money. So everybody in the county wanted to know why. Did she kill that guy that you were confused? You know, do you love her or something? So that's sort of in the air as the mystery proceeds. And then she also mentions environmental racism. And of course, in North Carolina, they have an odious, and I'll just say it, it's an odious system of hog farming in which they allow the urine and feces of the hogs to drain out through the slats in the floor, and they're flushed out into a big open cesspool, sometimes 5 acres in breadth and in width, and it just open to the air. And so if you live near there, it's just awful. The flies are just terrible, and they become a moving crust on your home. And of course, often they're put in, well, in fact, always they're put in places where the land is cheap and the people are poor, and they're a lot of times they're black. In fact, almost always. So the property values, of course, plummet, and and you can't use hog feces for manure because it's full of heavy metals. The only thing you can do with it is stack it up, and China owns half the hog industry now, and so they get the pork and we get the poop. And you're going to fill up North Carolina after a while, and everybody knows it, and it's not going to last, can't do this forever. So they got to find a solution, and the only solution is to start generating methane, and they haven't done that yet because it's costly, but they're going to have to do it, and they will eventually.
Okay, any other questions? So there's another thread in his book. From Venus flytraps to hog poop. We covered all the bases.
And don't worry, the hog poop is not, it won't affect you olfactorily by reading this book. But I guarantee you, if you've ever driven near a hog farm, you may have. Boy, there is a very characteristic smell, and your kids, they're there, they go to school smelling like that. No fun. Yeah.
One last.
So, why do they have heavy metal in their feces?
I don't know. But, I don't know. I don't know why that is, but they do. It's known, and so you can't apply. What they can do, and what they do is they spray. They get a spraying machine, and they'll fill up a tanker, and they'll drive over. They have what are called spray fields, and they'll spray to grow, grasses or hay or whatever, and it's a good fertilizer. But the actual physical mat material does have heavy metals, and they can't apply it to crops because it'll kill the soil eventually.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it get into the crop too.
It would get in there, and it gets into the, and of course the worst part of these hog lagoons, besides impoverishing the land values, is that hurricanes come to North Carolina all the time. We get hurricanes, and the hurricanes blow these berms down, or they put torrential rain and they overflow. And as you know, as soon as the dam overflows, it just eats away, and pretty soon a torrent of hog crap is going into the streams, and then 1 million fish deaths occur, and that's just happens all the time. It's just mind-bogglingly without foresight to have done this, but they're deep into it now. It's made everybody a lot of money who was involved in it, and it's hard to change, as you know. Hard to change that. But vote against it if you ever get a chance.
Okay. I don't know how to top that ending, but thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Tim is going to be signing the books. You want to stay right here?